Members, the Senate is still in recess. However, it is my honor and privilege to recognize someone who has been a mentor to me during my 10 years in the Senate, and that is to Senator Dick Cohen. Senator, the floor is yours.
So, Mr. President and members, let me start off by saying this is a little bit strange. Obviously, not the circumstances that we normally have for retirement speeches. It's been obviously a strange and difficult year for all of us. Let me first start by just thanking the great courtesy of the President, the Majority Leader, and standing back in the phone booth, Craig Sundag, who've been more than helpful and very flattering, both in terms of leaving the Senate right now, but also in arranging this day. I've got some friends and in the gallery, many of whom folks here on the floor know. The big surprise for me was the special guest arranged by Senator Bingham was my great seatmate of how many years? Former Senator Katie Sieben. And I haven't seen Katie for a little bit, and that's very flattering to have Katie show up. Let me offer a perspective, and John Jasinski said, did I want to bet the under-over on the length of my speech? And what I can tell you is, I wanted to say this is my last lecture, but there are no lectures. You've already heard my last lecture. But some things I want to say quite seriously, having been here for so many years. This floor of the Senate is a place where I think we spend more time here during a session than we spend at our homes. More time, obviously, than we spend in our offices. And this place is a unique place. It's a very special place. I don't know if anybody does what I often do toward the end of the session, where I just glance up and just let my eyes gaze. This is not what my office would look like if I was on the 40th floor of a Minneapolis law firm, I can assure you. It's a very unique place for all of us. But I do want to offer some thoughts, lots of thank yous. If you're here for 34 years, there are a lot of thank yous. And so I want to offer some thoughts on what started out to be honest, a very difficult year, and has ended up being a very special year. As many of you know, the year started with the death of my younger brother. And one of the reasons that I could no longer continue a campaign, some very positive things, some changes professionally, some opportunities professionally. And so it's turned out, and particularly with what's happening this afternoon, a very good time to leave. And I certainly don't leave without regrets. Certainly the fact that I'll miss working with all of you. If I have a regret in that context, it's the fact that I haven't gotten to know members of the freshman class, both majority and minority, as well as I might have hoped. It's been a very impressive class, with obviously the one exception, a little bit light on women, other than Senator Lane, but otherwise a very impressive class. And so if there's a regret, that's one, very sincere regret. But I have to look back a little bit, and if you're going to allow me, if you will allow me, to have just some thoughts, that kind of run through my mind in offering a quasi-farewell. We don't know how many more times we might be back this year. Maybe if you really like the speech, you could ask me to do it every special session. Assuming that won't be the case, I can't believe my good luck in being in this place. I left high school and went away to college. I went to school in Chicago, and that was going to be as close as I was going to get. I was going to go away to school. It was either Chicago or the East Coast. And I thought when I finished school, I was going to end up in the East Coast, was my goal. It didn't quite work out. I came back. I started school. I'd been involved in serious statewide political activity during college vacation periods. I came back, got involved in local politics, and next thing you know, I got elected to the state house representing the area I grew up in. And ran as the neighborhood kid. I was 25 years old, And to bring it full circle, I now live 5 blocks from my high school, and nothing that I quite expected. And I certainly have so many people to thank for what's happened, but certainly a huge thank you, and all of us would offer these thanks, to Senate District 64, who have, the residents of 64, if you include my terms in the House, I think have voted me into office, something like, I think it's 12 or 13 times, a couple defeats along the way, or one defeat, my first re-election to the State House, some very close races, which I want to talk about in a minute in a very serious vein. But certainly the fact that the folks from 64 gave me the opportunity to represent them in this body has just been an honor I can't believe. And I think all of us would say that when we retire, before we retire. The fact that the folks in our district invested in us the opportunity to lead the state. And when you stop to think about it, it's a very unusual honor that people we don't know, we've probably met a good number of them in campaigning, but people we don't know have said, you're the person we're going to support to lead us. It's just an overwhelming piece of flattery. And certainly in that context, I know we don't on the floor talk about politics, but I have to offer a particular thanks in that regard to the fellow who, he had surgery yesterday, some hip surgery, so he couldn't be here, but the fellow John Sherman, who some of you might know, who was my campaign manager in my very tough elections. And the fact that we have people like that who give up, not their lives necessarily, but give up so much of their time and effort, who are volunteers at our level in many instances to allow us to get here. I know after one election, a very close election, John was the campaign manager with somebody else, and Bill said to me a few days before the election, he said, yeah, you'll get elected, you'll go off to the state capitol, I get to go to work the next day. And folks who don't have the expectation of getting a job or getting a career. So it's very flattering when you think of what we're allowed to do because of folks like that. And the other thing is the fact that we have an opportunity to do things here, not just simply legislate, but we have a vista that's offered to almost nobody else. And I would certainly, to newer members, a piece of condescending advice, make sure you take advantage of the opportunities you're offered that aren't the kinds of opportunities you would get normally. I look at somebody like Senator Pappas and Sandy's work with international elected women and the kind of work she's done with that. In my case, many of you know of the pride I've taken in being appointed by President Obama to the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. And certainly with my involvement at a national level in the first Obama campaign, those folks knew about me, but I will also tell you the White House knew about the work that I had done here in terms of arts and cultural issues. And so I was apparently somebody they considered for a fairly high-powered committee. In fact, if you'll allow me, just the funniest thing ever written about me, I think. Let me see if you agree. The Political Newspaper magazine did a story after the committee was first sworn in November of 2009. We're sworn in by Vice President Biden. There was some press to it. And the thrust of the story was, what was this collection of 32 people? What were the commonalities? What were the intersections that they had? And so it starts out that it's not the ambassador to Great Britain, it's not the ambassador to France, but one of the more prestigious commissions that somebody could have been named was the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. But exactly what does this motley crew of characters have in common with each other? And I promise you the next line was, actress Sarah Jessica Parker and Minnesota State Senator Richard J. Cohen, ? Exactly. What did I possibly have in common with Sarah Jessica Parker? It's the best line ever written about me. So you have an opportunity to do some things because the kidding aside, the service on that committee, I was quite proud of. We had some unusual programs. There were a number of things that I did. In fact, it's one of the reasons I'm leaving. One of my close friends is the entree to the LA law firm I'm working with. And so we have some opportunity to do things that otherwise we don't have the opportunity to do. I have some serious things I would like to say to all of you, But like I said, 34 years, and you have to allow me some thank yous. And there's an element of, where do I start? Where do you start in this place? Because we are so dependent on so many others to get us through the day, to show us the doors, to show us what to do. You know, let's start with the front desk, with Cal and Mike and Colleen and Jessica. That's the front desk. Those are the folks we see all the time. How about the rest of the folks in engrossing, the folks in Senate information, you know, Charlie Shaw, John Trombley, and Scott Magnuson, who lives and breathes the state Senate. You know, unfortunately, I can just go on and on. The chiefs of staff for both caucuses, the minority-majority staffs, Dan Wolf, Cullen Sheehan. As I mentioned, Craig has been just spectacular and just very flattering to me. DFL chiefs of staff, my good friend Tom Kakelka. John Pollard was not, a little known fact for some of you about John Pollard. I first met John when he was the LA to the Republican minority leader in the Senate. And then when Dean switched parties, John came and joined the gang of us. But John, Christine Almeida, who became a very close friend, who's present today. The folks who've done so much for us, and I talk about chiefs of staff, I'd be remiss in not mentioning somebody who became a close friend and who was, I would argue, the model, Vic Moore, who was the long-term chief of staff in the Senate and did so much for so many of us. When I talk about staff, of course, I have to talk about the folks, and there's not a person who's ever served in the Senate who would disagree that we absolutely would not survive without Senate Counsel and Research. My entree into politics was working for Nick Coleman, who became Senate Majority Leader, who was then the Senate Minority Leader when he ran for governor. And when Nick became Majority Leader, he's the person who actually created the modern Minnesota State Senate, a very unusual, charismatic person. But one of the things he did is he put together Senate Counsel and Research. And if you can imagine existing without Senate Counsel and Research, and again, I would love to be able to go through every single person. And one advantage of being chairman of the Finance Committee for all the years that I was, and Julie's going to agree with this, is you get a chance to know a large number of the staff who aren't with your particular committee, and they're all very unique and unusual people. So I can't go through the entire list. Well, unusual in the best sense of the word, Joanne and others up there. So I can't go through everybody, but I do have to mention several people who made such a difference to me. Kathy Pontius, who retired a couple of years ago. That was kind of a tip-off for myself when Kathy left. And although she's come back temporarily, Kathy was my first Senate Counsel when I chaired what was then a significant division of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Joanne Zoff, who's here this afternoon, and Joanne was head of Senate Counsel and Research, and also, of course, was a predecessor to Cal, as was Pat Flavin, who I met originally through Nick. The folks, however, who did just huge amounts of work for me in the gallery, the first pair from my first go-around as Senate Finance Chairman. Chief Counsel was Peter Watson, clearly clever, the most clever person I've ever met in the Senate staff or member in the best sense of the word. And the person who served as the chief fiscal analyst for those years, Matt Mossman. And many of you know Matt from the work that Matt did during Governor Dane's administration, now working, representing the Inter-County Association, but did a spectacular job for those 8 years as the chief fiscal analyst. And I was gone for a couple of years from the chairmanship, came back, and I found myself working, and Senator Rosen, you're absolutely going to agree, you know how invaluable they are. Tom Bodern as counsel to the committee, obviously counsel to the Rules Committee, but counsel to the Finance Committee, and Eric Nauman. And Eric, unfortunately, Eric had surgery last week. He has he did something to an ankle of his, I think, in a bike accident years ago, and was scheduled for surgery. So he's actually not able to walk at this point. Otherwise, I have no doubt he would be here. We know he'd be here. He'd be here making sure that the state of Minnesota survives for another couple of years. And it's just impossible to not thank those people for what they've done, and not just for myself, but what they've done for the entirety of the state of Minnesota. So having suggested, and again, that's a problem. In fact, I look at my list, I forgot. The sergeants, we have Sven and Marilyn and Nick, but how about the rest, Dick and the folks who I missed this year in this very strange session, people like John Legou, Bob Davis, who I hope is doing well, Tom Klein, the folks who move us in and out, just kind of the unsung heroes of this place that we really wouldn't be able to survive without. Certainly I couldn't, because I would have no idea how to even hang a picture in my office, much less anything else. But I have to also thank particular senators. I talked about some of my seatmates, Chuck, Katie, who was so spectacular to sit next to for those years. Ron Latz was a seatmate, and we each learned a lot from each other. To date, myself, the mother of somebody we served with, Becky Laurie, was a seatmate for a couple of years. Randy Kelly for a few years. But I have to thank some of the senators I served with. And it's not to diminish anybody in this chamber, not to diminish anybody I've served with over the years. And at one point I thought maybe I would count the number of people I've served with. It's a lot. But I do want to mention several people in particular, people who were mentors when I came in. When I first came in, Nancy Bradis grabbed me. And most people here didn't know Nancy, who passed away, I think about 10 years ago or so. As Carla would confirm, she was, to use the phrase, a force of nature, and was just spectacular to me. First woman ever elected to the Senate, independent, I believe, of a spouse passing away. From Rochester, kind of the center of, I think, the Rochester Republican Party for a number of years, came to the Senate, was spectacular to me. Somebody that many of you do know. And I don't know what, I was offered I should have mentioned, I was offered, thanks to Cal, my historic, I'm at this desk. This is the desk I sat at for about 24 years. And I was going to sit next to Chuck, but Cal mentioned that my guests would not be able to see me in that corner. So Senator Ames was very accepting and allowing me to grab his desk and revisit my old territory. And so another reason I mentioned that is the person who was a mentor and a true partner over the years was Gary's predecessor, Denny Frederickson, and was one of the spectacular senators. And this is not to speak ill of Claire Roebling, and Julie, it doesn't involve you, but I always thought it was, when we lost the majority in 2010, I wish Dennis had run again, so he would have had the opportunity to chair the Senate Finance Committee. He was truly a partner in a lot of the work I did, more so than many of the people in the DFL caucus. Again, not to speak ill of the people in the DFL caucus. Dennis was just a spectacular state senator. And when I came in, the mentors in my caucus, Alan Spear, I shared an office with Alan, and Alan's successor, once removed, is Scott Dibble, and Scott knows exactly what Alan Spear represented. I mean, a hero to so many people. If I'm not mistaken, the first or second, I think the second gay legislator elected official in the country to announce that. A history professor at the university, probably the most brilliant legislator I've ever served with. I was the vice chairman of his committee, the Judiciary Committee, so I shared an office suite with him, and he was generous in so many ways. The only problem Alan and I had is he was an American history prof, that's my background, and we would have these obscure discussions, sometimes in front of the committee. I think there was one committee where he didn't like a bill I had that I was presenting. He made some reference to Richard II, and I wasn't very happy about that, and I went up to him and countered with Henry IV. And members of the committee were just rolling their eyes when we were doing this. But Alan was truly a special senator. The other person I want to mention that probably all of you know is Bill Luther. Bill was the assistant majority leader and kind of watched out for me in many respects and taught me so much about what happens in the state Senate. But I want to mention two senators in particular who are, I don't usually use the word heroes, but these were folks who just made a huge difference in my life. First was Gene Merriam. Gene was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. And if I learned about being a finance chair, both when I chaired state departments and, Mary Kiffmeyer and I have talked about this, that with this diffusion of our finance divisions, which I'm so on, when I chaired state departments, it was about 3.5, 4 times what it is today. And so it was a difficult division. And Gene was a member of the division, but it was Gene who taught me how to budget, how to understand the budget, how to work with individuals involved with the budget, how to chair a conference committee. I'm not going to give that lecture again, but that's where I learned about chairing a conference committee. Gene was a spectacular state senator. And finally, I had the chance to serve for so many years with the person who probably was the single greatest legislator of the second half of the century, and that's Roger Moe. And I wish all of you had the opportunity to serve with Roger. I know there are a few people here left, John, I'm trying to think who else served with Roger, Chuck, and David, Ann Rest. He was a remarkable legislator. You would talk to Roger, and he and I became, not initially, but at the end toward the end of his last X number of years, we became good friends. We're still good friends. I still see Roger. And he had an ability where you would talk to him and you thought you were his best friend and you would do anything for him. Now, the reality was you weren't his best friend. His best friend was actually Gene Merriam, but you thought he was your best friend. And I've never been the majority leader. And so I would turn to Paul, to Tom, who've done that. Obviously, Susan as a caucus leader. It's an unusual skill set. And if I were to write a book on legislative leadership, it would be titled The Roger Moe Story. And I don't want to go on and on about Roger, but thank you, Roger. I think Roger's actually listening this afternoon, that he was just spectacular. Okay, I said there'd be a lot of thank yous. I warned you. So now I got to do the personal thank yous. and these are the tough ones. Because that's the personal staff and the people who we get close to and get to know become our friends. And okay, so I've been here a while, so I've had a lot of personal staff. But I got to thank, to be fair, not everyone, but a good number of them. And I'm going to go in chronological order. Sheila Smith's not here. She was my first committee administrator and had served as my LA for a couple of years prior to that. And I'm really proud of what these folks have done. And some of you, many of you have met Sheila in her context of her current capacity as Executive Director of the Minnesota Citizens for the Arts. And she's put together, and I can tell you from all my national arts stuff, it is known to be the single best advocacy group in the country, arts advocacy group in the country. And it's a model for other advocacy groups. And Sheila was spectacular. Around the same time with Sheila, and she had hoped to be here, couldn't be here, Amy Shannon. And I don't think anybody remembers Amy. All I can tell you is we, in the process, became good friends. And without question, the single funniest person who ever worked for me. And it's not that it was a difficult time personally. If it had been, she would have gotten me through it. She still is one of the single funniest people I've ever met. Angie Haig. And Angie left. Angie worked for me for about 10 years, both as the LA and the CA. Spectacular. She deserted me for two great kids, Evie and Theo, and she's on her way right now, or was on her way earlier today with Evie, Theo, and Peter to their cabin. And again, expressed her regrets. Jane Geldman, who worked for several years and is now a rising star in the finance department of the Federal Health and Human Services in DC. but we do have some folks here. Kim Babine is in the gallery, and many of you remember Kim. Kim is now a director at DEED, and everything I hear from anybody at DEED or involved with her, with both this administration and the previous administration, is how spectacular she is. A number of you remember Josh Nye, who now is doing a great job as the executive director of the Alzheimer's Association, who was the LA for the Finance Committee for several years, and nobody more than Josh in terms of hearing from constituents about how great the office, or how responsive the office was, and it was all Josh. And as the cliche goes, last but not least, Nicole Kaplan, the second funniest person who ever worked for me, and Nicole knows that. She knows she's not as funny as Amy. But Nicole, she'll verify that. But Nicole has done not only a great job for me, but she has mentored so many new staff and been of so much help. And she's done something that we all ought to keep in mind, and that are her friendships with the majority staff. And when we were in the majority, her friendships with the minority staff. That she knows there's a distinction in this place between parties, but she's somebody who has worked so well with everybody. And I'd be remiss for not mentioning one last person, and that's the person who's kept me sane, going, living, whatever, and that's Jody. So I said this wouldn't happen. This normally doesn't happen to me. It's happened a couple times this year. You know, folks in my caucus heard me do this a little bit, which was only about 3 weeks after the death of my younger brother. So, but thank you, Jody. And she's also going to be very critical of me later today for even mentioning her name. Let me, if I might then, you've graciously sat through all the thank yous. And I just saw that Dave Oakes is taking pictures. So just another example of somebody, a long-standing Senate staffer that we don't give enough credit for. And that's why any of us could stand up for the rest of the day. And the nice thing about today, and John, I don't know how I'm doing with the over-under, but yeah, okay. But in 2012, we had just a host of retirements. And for those of you who are new members, I mean, normally the retirement day is a very moving day where everybody speaks, they speak in order of seniority. And in 12, by the time Keith Langseth got up, it was, several hours. So I figure, I'll take a couple of extra minutes. Let me offer some thoughts, however, if I might, about this place, and some negatives and positives. And I'm going to tell you what I don't like about this place, and what I wish I could change about this place. And a blame is to be placed on all of us, on many of us, both parties. And that's the increased polarization of politics in this country and in this body. In my first go around as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and prior to that, almost all of the omnibus finance bills passed with bipartisan votes. The only bill historically over the years that did not pass with such a vote was the omnibus tax bill. When we went from the minority in 12 back to the majority in 13, Katie, I don't know if you remember, you and I were talking, and Katie sat where Jerry sits. And we talked that, for the last 2 years, we just voted red on everything. Now we're just voting green on everything. There really wasn't much of a difference. And I think the polarization has become difficult. And I'm not going to get into what I think to be the genesis of that in this country, but it's something that both parties have participated in. As many folks know, certainly Carrie Root has been very generous in her comments on the floor in a chairmanship that she's done so well with relative to the legacy bill. and the fact that I was the one who helped put it together along with Larry Pogamiller and Denny. That was a bill that raised taxes, that's had a significant impact in this state, and it passed this body with 2/3 of the senators voting for it. It was 2/3 of the Democrats, roughly, and 2/3 of the Republicans. Voting against it, 1/3 of the Democrats, 1/3 of the Republicans. In fact, Tom still gives me a hard time about it because he was chairman of the tax committee, I was chairman of the finance committee, and he was one of the 1/3 of the Democrats who voted no, and still feels he cast the right vote, although I strongly disagree. And that's an example of something that major. At a much higher level, going back to years ago, I mentioned senators that really had an impact on me. I wasn't as close to her, so I can't say she had the same kind of impact, but a brilliant, brilliant senator, Linda Bergelin. And Linda, of course, was the person who helped create health care. And you know, Michelle Benson and Jim Abler are sitting here as the successors to a lot of what Linda created. But one of the things she was part of was the so-called, I think it was the Gang of Seven. I forget who the Gang of Seven were. But these were the people who put together MNCare. And it was 4 Democrats, and they were House and Senate members. There were 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. One of the Republicans I know absolutely was Dwayne Benson. And when Dwayne passed away last year, and how spectacular he was, Julie, Dave Senjum, and I spoke about Dwayne Benson. But they put together MNCare, and it was clearly a bipartisan group, and the governor was Governor Carlson. That's missing. I don't know how to recreate it. I have one thought, and whoever has the guts to do this, let me know. I mentioned that I came to this place as the hometown kid, and I had the ability to get elected. I'd grown up in the area, you know, I grew up with your son or daughter, so-and-so, and that made a difference. I also was a product of the precinct caucus system when I think it worked. I don't think it works anymore. I think what happens is too often now in politics, we speak to the echo chamber, and we don't hear the other side. We're not around the other side until we come to this body. And we can't do anything about the change in geographies or the populace within our district. But I do think the caucuses play into that. And you know, you can't get rid of the First Amendment. People can have caucuses, but I'll just offer the contrast. On March 3rd in my district, there were 29,000 people who voted for president. Week before the caucuses, and I have one of the most active districts in terms of the precinct caucuses, 900 people. All right, not a big year. But 2 years before, a very active campaign for governor, including somebody from my district, 1,600 people. By contrast, when I came to the state Senate, there was no other contest going on in the caucuses that night. There was also a cold, sleeting rain. It was the worst weather. And my district was quite a bit smaller, given redistricting. 2,600 people came to the caucuses that night, only for the state Senate. 1,600 people 2 years ago for a very contested race for governor. The caucuses have outlived their usefulness, and they have created a situation where we speak to a smaller and smaller echo chamber. And folks might want to consider that. If you set our primaries on March 3rd and then you started the session a few days later, you'd represent the 29,000 people in my district who came to vote in the presidential primary. Or in the governor's race, when we only had 1,600 people, which might be more apples to apples, when we had 23,000 people who voted for a governor. So that really concerns me. And part of it is I think that, you know, have I been a good legislator? I guess I hope so. If I have been, I can tell you it's because when I started running, I had to listen to different people. Nobody believes this, and I know in his first year, Matt Little just almost chastised me for mentioning this. I had some really, really tough races in my early years. I'm the first Democrat, you know, like Matt, to represent the area that I represent, the area I grew up in. I'm the last district to have been represented by a Republican in St. Paul or Minneapolis when I came to the state Senate and replaced Ron Seeloff, a person with whom I remain friendly with to this day, and was friendly when we were protagonists in the district. And we didn't run against each other. He left the Senate. I think I was made a better legislator for having to campaign, if not for Republican votes, to at least understand how people felt. And I look at the polarization. I've talked about a partisan polarization. I look at the geographic polarization, which I think is just simply tragic, and where our caucuses have become so geographically separate. And again, I'm symptomatic of that. As I mentioned, I'm the last person to represent a district that was held by a Republican in St. Paul or Minneapolis, and that's not going to happen again, absent something highly unusual. But I tried to make sure I had some sense. I think possibly the best compliment I've ever received was one of my campaigns X number of years ago, where I met a couple of people who had moved to the district from another state, and they were interested in getting involved politically. And we talked. And what one of them told me, he called me, and he said he and this other friend were at their friend's house, and they were talking about having met me a couple weeks before. And the next door neighbor came and joined the conversation. It was probably a nice summer day. And they were talking about meeting me, and he said, you know what? I'll tell you about Dick Cohen. I would never vote for him in a million years, but he's a pretty good guy. And that's what I try to do, and I think all of us try to do it. I think it becomes more difficult, again, with some of the polarization. That's a negative. Let me offer a couple of other thoughts, and let me offer positive thoughts. And I'm not going to sit here and give you a list of stuff I've done. I take pride in a lot of major legislation that I've put together over the years. But let me tell you what I take away from this place. And that's the impact that all of us have on individuals. You know, we get the collective applause. We go to a rally and they say, here's the hero on whatever, and we get big applause. But the response we get from individuals and the impact we can have on an individual's life. In the 90s, I authored, I think 93, 95, 97, 3 omnibus child support bills that changed the entirety of child support enforcement and collection. And I became interested in the federal government at some point came into play anyways, in the middle of this process. But the most significant reason for women falling into poverty was the inability to collect child support. And so I did some significant work in changing some of the child support laws. And I got a note from somebody, and I don't know how she knew that I was the author. I still have the note somewhere. But it was, Dear Senator Cohen, my father deserted us when I was 5 years old. My mother has struggled ever since. Thank you for what you've done, and thank you, because now for the first time, I can think next year of going to college. You know, when you get a response like that, you know you're doing something right and something for folks. Even something very simple. I've watched with jealousy, most recently Senator Kiffmeyer, Chuck doing it. When all of you sign letters to high school graduates, the St. Paul School District, X number of years ago, said we could not anymore get access to the list. I've talked to St. Paul senators that we should have put something in statute where we could have, you know, they would have had no choice. Because I enjoyed writing those letters and the notes. And I got a letter back from some graduate, and she wrote, Dear Senator Cohen, thank you very much for your note on my high school graduation. You've made me feel like a very important person. And I didn't do anything. I just wrote one of these notes that we, you know, these letters we signed. But that connection made a difference to her. More recently, if I can, one story, and Senator Benson and Senator Abler are going to know about this. I was approached last year about somebody in my district, a cab driver, and somebody who had been in legal difficulty, and Senator Limmer was involved with this as well. And this person had been in legal difficulty decades before, had been convicted of, I think, simple robbery, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't armed robbery. Had served a little bit of jail time. And DHS had changed, and he'd become a cab driver. That's what he did. He never went to college. He loved driving a cab. And he loved driving people to healthcare appointments. DHS, and I forget exactly what the rule was, had changed the rule where he was no longer allowed to drive these particular healthcare patients. And this was a good part of his business. And he didn't approach me, but his cab company that he worked for knew somebody, and they eventually came to me and authored me to author a very simple piece of legislation. And again, Michelle and Jim and Warren were very helpful in the passage of the bill in the Senate. And it did become law in the process last year. And I got a call from him. And I can't tell you how much he appreciated what this legislature did for him. He was given back his ability to work a job, earn a living at something he really enjoyed doing. And something that we would never think about. What can we do to help a particular cab driver? It was a simple bill. It wasn't, an omnibus anything. But it's the thing I've really enjoyed about this place. The chance to help folks and make a difference. Not even in terms of what we do with thousands and thousands of people, whether we're increasing taxes, lowering taxes, doing some with guns, whatever it is. The chance to help people just live a more complete life. John, we're getting close. I promise. Because I do want to leave a couple messages, not for any of you here, and what you've done, what we do, what we enjoy, but a couple messages for the state of Minnesota. I've served with a lot of folks over the years, lots of folks. And I can't tell you how impressed I am. If I've served with somebody who's been a fraud or a charlatan, I'm hard-pressed to give you the name. Obviously, some legislators are better than others. But I can't tell you, actually not you, because you all know it. I would tell the state of Minnesota, this is the hardest working group of people you could imagine. Now we don't work a job in construction. We don't work a job of that sort, which is just physically demanding. But the work that this place puts in year after year, and all of you know it, when we're here through the night. We've changed the rules of conference committees so we no longer meet through the night. I think my first major conference committee, on Sunday morning, I had to get a paper to know what day it was. This place, House and Senate, work as hard as any group of people you can find in representing the folks of this state. The other thing I would tell the folks in Minnesota is everybody I've served with are the most sincere folks I've met. What I mean by that is I can look around the floor and I can find somebody that I align myself with totally in terms of politics and ideology. And I can look at somebody else who's 180 degrees removed from what I am. But I will tell you that person who's 180 degrees removed from what I am is absolutely sincere and absolutely well-meaning in what they represent. And they might disagree with me, and I might think they have the wrong position. But I know from serving here for many years that I can tell the folks throughout this state, you are well served by the person you represent. That person is dead serious about the job that he or she is doing, and that person is dead serious about making sure that they represent their point of view. And they don't do it for reasons of self-aggrandizement or reasons that are not the best of reasons. And again, I would have a hard time trying to think, and I'm not going to go through all of my blue books over the years, but I would have a hard time coming up with anybody I think has not represented and legislated from that point of view of being absolutely sincere. Finally, you've given me a chance to do something else. As I mentioned, grew up in southwestern St. Paul, Highland Park, live a few blocks from my high school. which is kind of interesting. My college friends, my high school friends give me a hard time about it. I grew up in Minnesota. I knew Minnesota. You know, I started canoeing the Boundary Waters through a couple of YMCA trips when I was a kid, before it was a national park. My father grew up in Winnipeg. We'd drive up to see my grandmother. We'd go through Detroit Lakes. I'd been around the state. Remember Carey's bill for Paul Bunyan land? Went to Paul Bunyan land when I was a kid, as probably all of us did who grew up in Minnesota. But I learned about Minnesota in this place. I learned what it's like to be a farmer in Minnesota. I learned about the issues of farming. I learned about the range. I learned about people who are tradespeople. I learned about the diversity of this state. And now I'm learning about the new diversity in the state. I'm learning from people like Fong He and Patricia Torres Ray, people who didn't grow up in their home district and who came here under such different and difficult circumstances. Growing up, I knew one set of immigrants, and that was it, and those were Holocaust survivors who lived in my district, and growing up with some other kids. But I've learned about a different Minnesota by serving this body. I've learned about the geography of this state by serving this body. And that's what all of you have allowed me to do. You've allowed me to know Minnesota, to serve Minnesota, and it has been such a great honor to work with all of you, serve with all of you. I'll miss all of you, and I hope if you remember me as anything, that I guess he was a pretty good guy. Thank you. It's been a great honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. I learned a lot from you. I'm going to miss you, my friend.
Thanks. Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Thanks.
Senator Cohen, after your picture, please join me up here real quickly.
You're up there.
It's my honor to present.
I thought I'm presiding again.
You can do that too if you want. We'll let you do that again.
Can I just say that?
Sure.
The one thing I didn't
He
mention-
hasn't said enough, folks.
Yeah. When I presided, last man, Tom asked me, was it correct this was the first time I ever presided? The line I missed, which occurred to me, is I should have said, I don't like to rush into anything, so maybe I can do it again.
Well, it's my honor to present you with this plaque. It says Richard J. Cohen, 1987 to 2020, in recognition of your dedication and service to the people of the state of Minnesota through your accomplishments in the state Senate.
Okay. Thank you. Really
don't know if we can think, but we will.
Sorry.
Here, do this.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Congratulations. Thanks for all the
Members, we have one more speech, and it is my honor to turn it over to my friend, Dr. Senator Scott Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. And everybody in this room, to me, is a colleague because you've all served as mentors. 4 times in my life, I have been able to walk into a hallowed place that touched my heart. The first time was walking down the corridors in dental school, preparing for my first day of dissection of cadavers. The second time was walking into the chapel at the seminary after I had found that dental school wasn't suited for my tastes. The third time was when I walked into Bethesda Hospital a couple blocks north to begin my 3-year residency and realized that I would spend 75 hours a week for the next 3 years there. But the last time was when I walked into the Capitol and was sworn in approximately 50 years in one day after my father had been sworn in and sat, I think, in the seat where Senator Nelson is sitting right now. Each time I thought that, wow, this place is remarkable. And each time I was wrong, because each time what was really remarkable was the people. It's the people that shaped me. It had very little to do with me. It had everything to do with you. And I can honestly say, when I look into the eyes of each one of you, whether you're at the front dais or whether you're a colleague, whether you're a staff person or whomever, you have touched me and you taught me, because I came in silly and stupid, and at some level I'm going to leave the same way. Relationship-wise is where it's at. I know a guy who wrote a book called Relationship Matters. If I could hold up one shining relationship from my time in the Senate here, it would probably be Tom Bach and Paul Gazelka, as I had a chance to watch the two of them work together, hammer out their differences, and share the news with the people they worked with. So thank you to those two people. But perhaps most importantly, the relationship that really touched my heart throughout these last 4 years was a girl I married 42 years ago on Wednesday. Because with each night I got home at 10 or 11 at night, she was there ready to process, ready to boost me up. And if it seemed like I was maybe a little too full of myself, she would take me down a couple of pegs and remind me that I'd said this and it would have been better if I'd used this word, and I maybe could have been kinder, so don't get too full of myself. But it's in the relationship that the transformation occurs, and somewhere along the line you realize that this is an incredibly special privilege. And so again, I look at each one of you and I say thank you. I think of the constituents that come into my office and they share their heart, their soul, their needs. I think of some of the most unlikely candidates that would leave after a 5 or a 20-minute visit, and they would have changed me. So I so much appreciate that. I want to say thank you to all of you colleagues, to all of the support people. I want to say thank you to Sven and Marilyn. I think of the first days I came here. I want to say thank you to the peacekeepers that would protect and always greet us everywhere, especially that little snack shop down the hallway. Those people are just such good people. And I think I'm going to bring my comments to a close now, because I figured out how many minutes you get per year of service from Senator Cohen, and I don't get nearly as much time. But I would say this: when I left my residency at Bethesda in 1984, one of my greatest disappointments was the fact that there were so many fractured relationships, because at the time I left, the nurses in St. Paul were on strike. And we as residents weren't allowed to go and thank them for their influence on us. We weren't allowed to go out there and, quote, cross a picket line. So I left 3 years of being taught how to be a doctor without being able to say thank you. Today it's harder to say thank you, because I think of all the work that we've invested with one another to build relationships over the last 4 years, and it feels fractured, and that makes me sad. So I'd like to close with just a comment as to where are we now. These were comments that were born out of chaos and conflict, fear and despair. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. The concept for those words came to life the same year Minnesota did, 1858. And when Charles Dickens wrote those words, how could he ever have known what the situation would look like today? I know that the people that will stay here and the new people that will come will once again build relationships, and in so doing, you'll build bridges and you'll get us through this. Socrates said some 2,500 years ago, remember that there is nothing stable in human affairs. Therefore, avoid undue elation in prosperity or undue depression in adversity. Thank you, colleagues.
Senator Jensen, when you're done greeting folks, please make your way up front here. It's my honor to present Senator Jensen this plaque, which states Scott Jensen, 2017 to 2020, in recognition of your dedication and service to the people of the state of Minnesota through your accomplishments in the state Senate. Senator Jensen. Chair Scott. The Senate will come to order. Members working off of Addendum 2, remaining under motions and resolutions, will revert to the 8th order of business, introduction and first reading of Senate bills listed in the introduction calendar are Senate file numbers 148 to 163. These Senate files will be given their first reading and referred as indicated. Remaining under motions and resolutions, the Secretary has some motions to read.
Senator Housley moves that the name of Senator Kiffmeyer be added as co-author to Senate File Number 28.
On that motion, all in favor, say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion prevails. Remaining under motions and resolutions, we have a resolution to be read by the Secretary.
Senators Hayden, Champion, Torres Ray, Herr, and Franzen introduce Senate Resolution Number 9, a Senate resolution expressing the cultural and historical significance of Juneteenth.
Senate Resolution Number 9 will be referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration. Remaining under motions and resolutions, Senator Benson.
Mr. President, I move that Senate File 28 be taken from the table.
On that motion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion prevails. Members, the next bill up for consideration is Senate File 28, Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I think you remember about a month ago we had Senate File 3226 on the floor that passed out of the Senate. It was to allow for third-party driver's license test exams to be given by a third-party examiner.
Senator Housley, my mistake. I jumped the gun there. We need to first designate Senate File 28 as special orders, which I will call on Senator Benson to do.
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 26, I designate Senate File 28 to be made special orders for immediate consideration.
After we heard Senator Westrum's bill on broadband, I was being a little too speedy fast or whatever he was saying. Okay, now we're ready to roll. Senator Housley, Senate File 28.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Many of you remember a month ago we had Senate File 3226 during regular session on the floor. It was to allow for authorizing third-party testing for Class D and commercial driver's licenses. It passed off the Senate floor. We continue to hear in the news about the backlog of kids trying to get their driver's license tests. Right now, I actually had a friend call for her daughter to get their driver's license. The daughter's not even turning 16 till August 6th, and the first appointment they could get through DVS is November 15th. We've heard stories of families driving their kids all over the state, up to Moorhead, down to Rochester, Thief River Falls to take their driver's license exam test because it's the first place that they can get in. That bill that we had would allow for third-party testers to do the testing, but the bill didn't go anywhere in the House. We've been working with DVS and the House to try and get something, just try and get something. When we had committee hearings, we heard directly from DVS that their plan to address the backlog, as you've heard, there'll be up to 120,000 driver's tests to be backlogged by the end of the year. 120,000. DVS said that their plan was to do the CDL tests. They were going to do the commercial driver's license test by a third party. So that would take maybe 9,000 of them out of the equation. But they had their proposal, and we added that into the bill, but that ended up getting stripped out also. So the only thing that was agreed upon by the House and the Department, which is in this amendment, which, Mr. President, I probably should offer the A7 amendment.
Senator Housley offers the A7 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Housley moves to amend Senate File 28 as follows. Delete everything after the enacting clause and insert Section 1. This is Amendment A-7.
To the amendment, Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a delete all amendment, and I actually debated not taking this because It doesn't do what I wanted the original bill to do, which was to privatize testing for Class D licenses. But again, we have to deal with the House and we have to deal with the administration, and this is what we can agree upon. And in the 11th hour of special session, I want to do whatever we can to get as many kids their driver's tests. The department said that this will remove the whole backlog by the end of October. I will have Senator Newman speak to it also. But what this amendment does is 6 things. Number 1, there's now a no-show fee. The department said that if all of the people who didn't show up were actually charged a fee, maybe they'd either show up or leave that space available for somebody else to come and take their driver's test. So there's now a no-show fee of $20. We also heard that there was driver's exam schools who were reserving spots at DVS for their kids to be taking the test. In this bill, this bans the reserving of test times. Also, it authorizes, and this will probably remove some of the backlog. Kids right now have to go to DVS to take their written exam. I remember doing that written exam right there. Now you're able to take your written exam through an online test. It also requires DVS to bring back to us 2 reports, one of them in January 2021, let us know how the backlogs are, and the other one's due in January 2022. Again, members, this doesn't do everything that I wanted. Doesn't even take care of the CDL exams, but it is what it is, again, in the 11th hour in special session. So whatever we can do to reduce some of this backlog for those kids to go get their driver's license test, I think we need to pass it. So I encourage a green vote.
Members were on the A7 amendment. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, to the A7, I had the pleasure, along with Senator Dibble, of being invited to participate in a Zoom hearing with the House yesterday. And during the course of that House hearing, the Director of Vehicle Services, Emma Corey, was invited to testify, and she spent a fair amount of time talking about a plan that DVS has come up with for addressing the road test backlogs that Senator Housley has addressed. And that is a report that came out on April 16th. And in that report, Ms. Corey has stated that there's something over 81,000 Class D road tests that DVS intends to erase between June 1st and October 31st of this year, provided we provide them or help them with some tools that they need in order to accomplish that. The Department of Vehicle Services has testified that they are in favor of or want to look seriously, maybe that's a better way to phrase it, at CDL third testing. However, our friends in the House, they were not all that anxious to take that measure up. But in addition to the third-party CDL testing aspect, Ms. Corey also indicated that what would be very, very helpful to them if we gave them the authority to institute this $20 fine, or penalty, I should say, for late cancellation or no-shows. And if we also allowed them to utilize online testing for obtaining a driver's permit. And if we gave them those 2 key measures, she assured us that they will deliver by the end of October, and that 81,000 plus backlog that they refer to in this report will be resolved by the end of October. The A7 does in fact provide for those tools for them. It also provides that DVS will come back to the legislature with a report telling us the effect of the backlog and whether or not the legislation that we provided helped, and they will also provide us with a report on how successful the online testing that we will have authorized in the A7 amendment. So if we give them the tools that they have requested that are contained in the A7, and they come back to the legislature next year and give us a report as to the success of their program, I believe that that's worthwhile. As Senator Housley indicated, it's not everything that we wanted, but it's part of what we wanted. And I think it's a good step. I think we ought to help the Department of Vehicle Services with these tools and with what the director, Ms. Corey, stated in this Zoom hearing that Senator Dibble and I participated in with the House. I do believe that they will make up that difference. And that, of course, is good for our constituents, and that's really the bottom line of what we are trying to accomplish. So I would stand in support of the A7 amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on the A7 amendment. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm standing in support of the A7 amendment. As Senator Newman accurately reported, we were able to participate in the House hearing. It was a couple days ago, yesterday, I can't remember, it all runs together. And we heard the updated plan from Driver and Vehicle Services about all of the steps that they're taking to address the backlog in on-road driver's license testing, particularly for Class D driver's licenses. And they're doing quite a few things. These three elements they need our help with to effectuate the $20 cancellation fee, not reserving slots for vested interests, if you will, and allowing the online driver's license knowledge testing to be done on a web-based, so folks don't have to occupy tester resources at the facilities. They're doing a number of other things as well. I don't remember the entire list, but it includes things like consolidating, which is an inconvenience, admittedly, for a lot of folks because they're having to drive sometimes some great distances, but consolidating some of the locations so that those locations can stay open for much, much longer hours, and time isn't lost in getting testers around to remote sites who can only then do testing for small, little, narrow windows a couple times a week. And other measures like that. They're very confident that, in fact, they'll resolve the 80,000 backlog. Over 20,000, or about 20,000 tests had to be canceled when the pandemic first struck. Their production has ramped up from just a few hundred when they first reopened road testing. Now they're doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 or more. I don't remember what the number is, but they're clipping at a really, really great pace, getting a lot of this backlog already addressed every day, every week. To Senator Housley's point, I know a number of folks have called to get appointments, and they're looking at November and somewhere remote. We just encourage the public to, even if they have one of those appointments in November in some distant place from where they live, just keep calling, because every day more and more slots are opening up. So if you have that November slot, wherever, just encourage your constituent to call back and call back again. Something will open up sooner and much, much closer to where folks live. Some of the ideas that Senator Housley has, maybe with merit, there's just a few barnacles or gotten a little static in other places and can't quite get it slipped through in this special. We'll keep talking about some of those things. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further discussion on the A7 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. We'll take a brief pause to gather the votes of the members in alternate locations. Receiving a sufficient number of aye votes, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. Members, we're back on Senate File 28 as amended. Any further discussion? The Secretary will give Senate File 28 its third reading.
Senate File 28, a bill for an act relating to motor vehicles.
Third reading. Final discussion on the bill. Members, we're on final passage of Senate File 28 as amended. Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll. Members in the retiring room, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in the retiring room. Members in room 303, please come to the chamber to vote. And members in the President's office, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in room 323, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in room 237, please come to the chamber to vote. And members in room 206, please come to the chamber to vote. I will call on Senator Jasinski to report the votes of the members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Anderson B. votes aye.
Senator Anderson B. votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Chamberlain votes aye.
Senator Chamberlain votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hall votes aye.
Senator Hall votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lang votes aye.
Senator Lang votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Howell votes aye.
Senator Howe votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Gazelka votes aye.
Senator Gazelka votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Rosen votes aye.
Senator Rosen votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Ingebrigtsen votes aye.
Senator Ingebrigtsen votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Limmer votes aye.
Senator Limmer votes aye. I will now call on Senator Frentz to report the votes of the members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Frentz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senator Dietzick votes aye.
Senator Dietzick votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Carlson votes aye.
Senator Carlson votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Eaton votes aye.
Senator Eaton votes aye.
Senator Lane votes aye.
Senator Lane votes aye. Don't smile. Senator Frentz.
Senator Latz votes aye.
Senator Latz votes aye.
Senator Newton votes aye.
Senator Newton votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Hayden votes aye.
Senator Hayden votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Pappas votes aye.
Senator Pappas votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Rest votes aye.
Senator Rest votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Sparks votes aye.
Senator Sparks votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Wickland votes aye.
Senator Wickland votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Kent votes aye.
Senator Kent votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Senator Champion votes aye.
Senator Champion votes aye.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Senjum votes aye.
Senator Senjum votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Westrom votes aye.
Senator Westrom votes aye. All members having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Remaining under motions and resolutions, we have a motion to be read by the Secretary.
Senator Weber moves that the names of Senators Howe, Draheim, and Goggin be added as co-authors to Senate File Number 144.
On that motion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion prevails. Senator Benson.
Mr. President, I will be moving for a brief, not a brief recess, an hour and a half recess. Republicans will caucus in 1200. The sooner you get there, the sooner we'll finish. And with that, did Senator Frentz want to speak?
Senator Frentz.
Thank you, Senator Benson, and thank you, Mr. President. Minority will caucus immediately after this. Check your emails.
Senator Benson renews her motion that the Senate recess to the call of the President approximately 1.5 hours. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion prevails. The Senate is in recess.
Aye.